So in this video, we are going to discuss the biology of cancer. So the human body is made of trillions of cells. Cells are really, really small and they make up everything we are and all of our organs. This shows how a bunch of cells together make up a tissue. In this picture, we see heart tissue. This is a picture of a lot of heart cells together. All these cells and tissues put together make an organ. So all of our heart cells and tissues put together make our heart. And this is the same for every part of our body. In order for us to grow from babies to adults and so that we can heal our body cells, our cells divide to make more and more cells. Cells are constantly dividing in our body every second to make new cells, and old or unnecessary cells are dying in our body every second. This picture is here so that you can visualize how one single cell can divide multiple times to end up making a lot more cells. So one cell divides into two, and then each cell divides into two, and then each cell divides into two, and that's how you end up making a lot of cells. The way cells do this is called mitosis. They basically just split in half, grow to get a bit bigger, then split in half again, and so on. As cells divide and we have more and more cells, some have to die or else would never stop growing. So to maintain a constant amount of cells in our adult body, old or necessary cells die. Cells that have mistakes inside them are usually also programmed to die. A cell with an error would be really bad if it kept dividing, because then it and all of its daughters wouldn't be able to carry out their function. For example, if there's a mistake in one of our liver cells and it doesn't die, then it can end up dividing into two, and then its daughters will have that mistake as well. Then those cells will divide into two as well, and so on. Eventually, our liver would then have a lot of cells that do not function correctly, and so our liver would start malfunctioning. The directions for what cells have to do is stored in our DNA. DNA is just a very large molecule stored inside our cells. DNA tells our cells what kind of cells they are, such as you're a liver cell or you're a heart cell. It tells the cells what they should do in their daily life. DNA also controls when cells should die. It gives instructions to cells for when to divide, if it's okay to divide. It can detect when a cell has mistakes and isn't working properly, so it can instruct the cell to die. Cancer is a disease that is caused by the unregulated and uncontrollable growth of cells. This can happen when the instructions in the DNA are damaged, causing cells to lose their ability to recognize when they should divide and when they should die. Errors in the DNA are called mutations. Here, we can see what happens when a cell gets an error in its DNA that causes it to change. That cell will divide and pass on those errors to its daughter cells. A daughter cell can then end up accumulating more errors, making it even more different than its original mother. That cell can again divide, and every cell division will cause more and more bad cells and more errors. Here I just showed like errors based on the darker it gets. It's over here very yellow and orange and happy, and then it gets an error, divides again, gets more errors, divides again, gets more errors, and then now you're just a crazy, totally different cell. Normally, those errors would induce a cell to die so that it doesn't accumulate more errors and it doesn't hurt us. But in the disease of cancer, cancer cells do not have DNA that is working properly to stop a cell from dividing. And so cancerous cells will divide a lot and really fast, and they will accumulate more and more errors or mutations, and this will cause clumps of these cells to form, which end up as tumors. There are two types of tumors. Benign tumors are not considered cancer because those cells tend to have less mutations in them, which means they won't disrupt our body as much. Benign tumors also do not spread to other parts of our body, so they can easily be removed surgically, and they generally do not grow back. On the other hand, malignant tumors are considered cancerous. These cells, the cells of malignant tumors, have so many errors that they acquire new characteristics that normal cells do not have, which we will review in a bit. Due to these new characteristics, malignant cancer cells can spread to other parts of our bodies, causing new tumors to form there. It's difficult to remove malignant tumors because even if a few cells are left behind, another tumor can grow again. These are some of the characteristics of cancer cells that are different from normal cells that allow them to survive and spread around our body. Once a tumor gets really big, the cells in the middle of the tumor will be really squished and far away from blood vessels to get oxygen. So cancer cells develop the ability to survive longer without oxygen. They can also cause new blood vessels to grow in order to feed the cells of the tumor. Cancer cells are also less adhesive, so it is a lot easier for them to detach from the tumor, enter our blood or lymph vessels, and travel around. Cancer cells also secrete proteins that allow them to cross body barriers that usually normal cells cannot cross. As we mentioned, cancer cells can break away from the original tumor and travel through the blood or lymph system to distant locations in the body and form tumors in those areas. That is called metastasis. When someone is diagnosed with metastatic cancer, it means that they have an original tumor, but they also have more tumors in other parts of their body that were caused by cells from the original tumor. For example, this image depicts a tumor that began in the kidney. Then the cells from that original tumor began to travel through the blood and started dividing in the liver. So another tumor formed in the liver. So often, mutations or errors in our DNA will accumulate slowly as a person ages, leading to a higher risk of cancer later in life. This happens normally just because of chance. In a lifetime, cells have divided trillions and trillions of times, so it can't always be perfect. The longer we live, the more chances there are for a mutation to happen when a cell divides. So, hereditary means that something can be passed down from one generation to another generation. The disease of cancer itself is never inherited. What people inherit is a large probability of developing cancer. So, how do people end up with this higher probability? Well, we have two versions of our DNA. Sure. Hereditary means that something can be passed down from generation to generation. The disease of cancer itself is never inherited. What people inherit is a larger probability of developing cancer. So, how do people end up with this higher probability? Well, we have two versions of our DNA in our cells, one that we get from our parents, from our dad, and one that we get from our mother. Each of those versions carries their own instructions for our cells. These instructions are called genes. For cells to lose their ability to control their growth and division, often both of these genes need to be lost. It is not very likely to lose both genes in a lifetime. It is more likely that we will only lose one gene. If two genes are lost, then that's when cancer can develop. But if a person is already born with only one gene, and it is normally likely to lose one gene in a lifetime, that person is already born with a higher probability of ending up with 0 working genes. In the case of on the right here, in the case of the right here, cancer will most likely occur because only one gene loss event has to happen. This figure on the right shows how a person can be born with only one gene instead of two. In this scenario, the mom only has one working gene, where this blue gene or DNA is the working copy, and the red one is the not working copy. So the dad can give the child either of his copies, either this one or this one. The mom can give the child either the working copy or the damaged copy. So the two choices, or the two things that the child could end up with, they could end up with one of the working copies from dad and the working copy from mom. Or the child could end up with a working copy from dad and the damaged copy from mom. So if something ends up happening in the child's life that causes their one working gene to be lost or mutated, then they have no working genes anymore that can provide the proper instructions for cells, and that is when cancer cells can begin to develop. So again, this person was not born with cancer. They were born with a higher chance to develop cancer. So what things in our lives can end up causing those mutations in our DNA that could interrupt the instructions our cells get? Some of these risk factors are depicted on this visual on the left. This includes increased age, alcohol, cancer-causing substances, chronic inflammation, diet, hormones, immunosuppression, infectious agents, obesity, radiation, sunlight, and tobacco. These risk factors listed can cause the mutations that lead to uncontrollable division. So we talked about how cancer is caused. Now we are going to talk about cancer itself. Cancers are categorized cancers can be categorized based on the kind of cells that form the tumor. So we're going to go over those different cancer categories. Cancer can happen in any cell type of the body, as in like it can happen in heart cells and liver cells and brain cells and lung cells. But cells are also categorized by the function they have, such as if they line outer parts of that organ, if they line the cavities, if they provide structural support, etc. So cancers are often categorized by the type of cell, the function that the cell has in the body. So first, I want to touch on the stages of cancer. There is stage 0 through 4, and the stages are a way to say how much the cancer has spread or grown. So stage 0 is when the mutation first begins and the first few bad cells begin to divide. Stage 1 is when the cells begin to grow abnormally, but just in the area where they originated. So in this picture, the weird cells here are staying near this top layer. Stage 2 is usually when the tumor begins to form. Depending on where the tumor is, people can start beginning to feel small lumps. Cells begin to grow past the layer they started on. So here we see the cells growing to this like more yellow layer. Stage 3 is when the tumor is a lot bigger and has likely already invaded the blood vessels. It can no longer be cured by surgery because there will be cells traveling throughout the body already. Stage 4 is the last stage when there is metastatic cancer and there are multiple tumors throughout the body due to the traveling of the cancerous cells. This shows why early detection is so important. If cancer is detected and removed in the earlier stages, before cells have traveled throughout the body, then we just have to remove that small clump of bad cells. If there are cancer cells everywhere, then it becomes really hard to target just the cancer cells and not the rest of the cells in our body. So one cancer type you'll often hear is carcinoma. It is the most common and begins in epithelial tissues. Epithelial tissues are the barriers between our inner body and the outer environment. And epithelial cells also usually form the functional parts of organs. Some examples of epithelial tissues are the skin, the lining of our intestines, the lining of our lungs, the lining of the abdominal cavity, lining of ducts, such as the lining of milk ducts, lining of pancreatic ducts, or liver ducts. So you can have breast carcinoma, lung carcinoma, liver carcinoma, etc. This type of cancer can spread to other parts of the body or be confined to one primary location. Sarcomas form in the connective tissues such as the bones, muscles, fat, and vessels. So you can see here the difference between carcinoma. This is a blood vessel, and carcinoma is in the cells that line the hole, the actual hollow area. And then sarcoma is of the cells that are more connective tissue that form the structure of things. So these are the cells that actually form the actual vessel, the actual tube, not the lining of the tube, but the actual tube. Leukemia begins in the blood, forming tissues of the bone marrow. In leukemia, the white blood cells are affected. Typically, your white blood cells normally grow and divide in an orderly fashion, but in individuals with leukemia, the bone marrow produces an excessive amount of abnormal white blood cells that do not function properly. Leukemia is more common in children. Lymphoma begins in the lymphocytes, which are the T and B cells that mature in the lymph nodes. This type of cancer is more common in older adults. Multiple myeloma is a type of cancer that is formed in plasma cells, which are a type of B cell. Typically, plasma cells can help you fight infections and make antibodies that will recognize and attack germs. Abnormal plasma cells are called myeloma cells. In multiple myeloma, cancerous plasma cells build up in the bone marrow and crowd out healthy blood cells and form tumors in bones. This is because the cancer cells produce abnormal proteins that cause complications rather than produce beneficial antibodies. Melanoma is considered to be the most serious skin cancer, and it begins in the melanocytes. Melanocytes are a type of cell in the layers of our skin which produces melanin, which is what gives your skin its color. And this is all the content we have for the biology of cancer, but remember that each person's cancer is a unique combination of genetic alterations. Specific genetic changes may make a person's cancer more or less likely to respond to certain treatments. For this reason, there is no single treatment that is likely to work in every patient. And we hope that we were able to show how cancer sometimes is truly just a game of chance. Cells divide trillions and trillions of times, so it is just a chance that sometimes those divisions will go wrong. So cancer is never a punishment from God or from anyone. It can happen to anyone, good or bad. And sometimes cancer can be hereditary, but even when it is hereditary, there are people who still never get it because cancer and cell division is incredibly complex, and there are so many factors that can affect it. Thank you so much for watching this presentation on the biology of cancer.